So, those of you who are not familiar with all the interdisciplinary stuff at the symposium, Donald Bliwise is a very well-known and respected researcher from Atlanta, Georgia. He's a professor of neurology, psychiatry, I learned, and also a professor of nursing. So he is actively involved in nursing, but his primary focus is sleep disorders. And he will try to point out what is the connection between sleep, the first time of sleeping. Donald, thank you very much for coming to the ICS. We appreciate it very much, although he's here for less than 24 hours.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here with you today, and I want to provide, in the brief time that I have, a little bit of background for you on Nocturia and how it disrupts sleep. I've been a consultant to industry and academic areas, as well as being supported by the U.S. National NIH, by the NIH research grants. I want to start with this. These are the first data that showed that Nocturia was a cause of disturbed sleep, or at least an associated factor with disturbed sleep. These are Swedish data. They were published almost 20 years ago, and they indicated that in females, the more likely you are to wake up at night to void, the higher the rate of your disturbed sleep. And you can note by the different color bars there, this occurs in all age groups. So while disturbed sleep increases with age, Nocturia, as a key factor for disturbed sleep, is present in every single age group. Now, this is a study we did a number of years after that. This is a US-based population. Women and men were included here. In this particular survey, we gave people a checklist and said, check as many of these causes of poor sleep as you'd like. They could check as many as they chose. And you can see there in the middle of the slide the different kinds of symptoms and signs that people could report. Heartburn, coughing, waking up with concerns and being anxious, and so on. The symptom which was the sign that was the most common, in other words, the one that people said disturbed their sleep every night or almost every night, was use of the bathroom. By far, it is the most common cause of disturbed sleep. This is really a remarkable finding, and many researchers in the sleep field just never thought to even ask about it, but it's a common symptom. If you ask people what disturbs your sleep, Nocturia quickly comes to the top. In that same survey, we were very interested in evaluating the relative importance or the relative strength of the association between Nocturia and poor sleep. And so we did a fancy statistical model in which we put known factors that were associated with poor sleep. For example, depressed mood, that's been shown many, many years is an associated factor for poor sleep, as well as conditions like arthritis that may be associated with pain. Female gender is more typically associated with poor sleep. We put all of these different components in the model at the same time, along with Nocturia, to see if Nocturia really predicted poor sleep independently from these. And the answer you can see on the green bar is that it clearly does. So Nocturia is an independent risk factor for poor sleep. Now, it is true that not everyone who has Nocturia is disturbed by it. So working with a geriatrician in our group, we gave a sleep questionnaire to the same individuals who we were evaluating for Nocturia. And actually, this was a diary, what we call a sleep diary, a little different from the FVC type chart that you just heard about. In the sleep diary, we asked people very specific questions. How many times did you wake up? How long did it take you to fall asleep? Did you have trouble going back to sleep? What was interesting about this particular study was that it was difficulty falling back to sleep after the nocturnal voiding, which was the biggest concern to patients. So while everybody dislikes waking up at night, what really troubles the patient the most is being unable to go back to sleep. And you can see that there on the third line. That was a significant difference between individuals who were disturbed about their nocturia versus those who were not. Now, one of the important things to bear in mind about nocturia is when it occurs. And you probably have all seen in your training or what material you've read, either online or in textbooks, these typical, typical sleep architecture that's been described. And you should probably all know that REM sleep occurs about every hour and a half throughout the nocturnal period. I hope my pointer will work here. Let's see if there we go. There's REM sleep occurring here. Slow wave sleep, or the deep stages of sleep, what we call stages 3 and 4, now they're called N3 sleep, predominate early in the night. That's SWS, slow wave sleep. And that occurs early on in the period of sleep. What's really important to remember about nocturia, particularly the first episode of nocturia, is that it's likely to occur during these phases of sleep. So this is potentially very important because slow wave sleep is known to be the deepest stage of sleep. Brain metabolism slows. If you disrupt slow wave sleep, as I'll show you on the next slide, it has a lot of bad effects on overall health. So potentially, the disruption of this first uninterrupted period of sleep is quite a detrimental impact that nocturia can have on health. And this is one example of that. These data were collected in healthy young adults without nocturia. They're experimental data, but they're very important because they show a proof of concept. The proof of concept is if you disrupt slow wave sleep, and how would you disrupt that? Every time the person goes into slow wave sleep and their brain waves show these big high amplitude delta waves, you make a noise and you wake them up. It's an experimental protocol. It's a proof of concept protocol. And if you look at markers of glucose tolerance and glycemic control, what you find is that in healthy young men, you can make them glucose intolerant merely by disrupting their slow wave sleep. So this is very important. When we view nocturia, and particularly the time to the first voiding episode, we suspect, and I'll show you in a minute, some data which actually imply that this disruption of slow wave sleep could have long-term adverse effects. I don't know how I got that there. I hit something inadvertently, and thank you. Now, this is another study done by a group in the UK, also in healthy young adults. I'm showing you the healthy young adults to show you what might happen and what we think does happen in nocturia patients. This was a study that, again, wanted to interrupt the deep stages of sleep. So here we're talking about SWA, which is slow wave activity. For those of you who have some background in neurology or EEG, you know that's the spectral power contained in the delta frequency band. And this is very much like that hypnogram I showed you before with higher delta or slow wave activity early on in the night. This is an uninterrupted night of sleep in healthy young people, and you can see the abundance of slow wave sleep occurring early in the night. If you produce noise and sound and disrupt that first 2-3 hours of sleep with noise, you get a decrease in the deep sleep. But because slow wave activity in the brain is under homeostatic control, once the noise stops, the person makes the slow wave activity up. So this is a good thing. This is a healthy thing. And it would generally imply that, well, you can lose deep sleep early in the night, but you make it up. The reason why I'm showing you this slide is because the investigators were very careful in this particular experiment, and they looked at how much slow wave sleep you made up during the rest of the night, and it turns out you don't make it up. So in healthy young adults, again, without nocturia and with completely optimal health, if you disrupt their slow wave sleep with noise, they make it up a little bit, but they never get back to the baseline. So what does this have to do with nocturia? Let me show you some data. These were data from Japan that were presented at the EAU meeting just about a year ago. And what they showed was if you take nocturia patients, now we're working in the area of nocturia, and that first void, the first time a person wakes up to use the bathroom at night occurs in the first 2 cycles of sleep, compared to people whose first void occurs after the first 2 cycles of sleep, and you look at how much slow wave sleep, that's N3 sleep, same thing here, they get for the entire night, the people with nocturia in the first 2 sleep cycles never make it up. It's lost. It's gone. This is a single night. So what this means is that these people are chronically losing deep sleep. This is another way of looking at the same data. This is looking at the number of voids per night total. So these are people who only wake up 1 time at most a night versus those who wake up more than 2 times per night. Again, everything else about their sleep was relatively similar, but they lose the deep sleep. So this is very critical. It's very important. And when placed in the context of what I showed you before about poor glycemic control with loss of slow wave sleep, this would imply that nocturia, when it's there chronically, night after night after night, can really have some adverse health outcomes because of the disruption of sleep. So I will be happy to take questions at this point. We do have a little time built in for this, and I would encourage the audience to ask any questions, please.
So please feel free to step to the microphones. Alternatively, you can write down your questions on the question card, give it to one of the hostesses. I can see there is a question coming here from the auditorium. Please go ahead. You may want to introduce yourself at the beginning.
Hi, I'm Pallavi Latte. I work in Birmingham. I'm a urogynecologist. The question was, does this apply to people who work night shifts? So their rhythm is opposite to the routine people. So yes. What happens if they complain of their sleep disturbed in the daytime because their sleep is in the daytime?
Right. So that's an excellent question. The question involves what happens to people who work night shift, who don't sleep at the usual hours. So as you probably know, night work, shift work, particularly changing shifts, working days and nights and evenings and so on, is very, very hard for the sleep system to adapt to. People who do chronic shift work have higher rates of GI disease, poor glucose control, hypertension. Their mortality rates are actually higher also. It would be tempting to attribute all of that to sleep, and because I'm a sleep expert, I tend to view that disruption of sleep is most critical. But certainly people who do shift work, who are trying to sleep at what we call a circadian time that's not in synchrony with their biologic clock, are going to incur a disruption of slow wave sleep. They'll also incur a disruption of all of their sleep. They'll have less REM sleep. They'll have more what we call stage 1. So we would certainly expect these effects to be even more pronounced. Remember, we're modeling this, or the other researchers have modeled this in healthy young male subjects who are just sleep deprived or who has their slow wave sleep interrupted for a couple of nights. Imagine someone on chronic shift work. So I think that's an excellent point. We would expect people on chronic shift work who are sleeping out of phase with their biologic clock to incur decreased amounts of slow wave sleep.
Donald, I've got a question. What we have learned as urologists, urogynecologists, the magic number is 2 or more voids at night becomes bothersome. But according to your data, it would be more a shift from 2 to more than 4 hours, and the rest you can void 2 or 3 times, and it's not bothering you anymore. Or am I going too far to ask you this? So it's not the number, but it's the time until the first void.
Well, that's a good question as well. So the time to first void, we've been particularly interested in as a variable because we think it disrupts the slow wave sleep. Let me show you. A couple of years ago, I looked through a number of clinical trials to find out what measures of sleep urologists have used to try to characterize sleep. And I was very disappointed to see that most of them didn't even measure sleep at all. I thought it was very interesting that this first uninterrupted sleep period has been used in a number of different trials with different kinds of interventions to characterize sleep. There's other questionnaires and approaches too. This is the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index and a sleep diary like I mentioned before. Yes, we think the first uninterrupted sleep period is a particularly sensitive measure. That doesn't mean that if someone gets by for 4 or 5 hours before they void and then they wake up 3 or 4 times after that, we shouldn't treat that. I think it's really important to focus on the total amount of sleep. Often that can be a critical variable. Interventions, for example, that might improve, let me try to get, for example. So if FUSP, the first uninterrupted sleep period, increases by 1, 2, 3 hours, if you treat it, the length of sleep will also increase. So you can be, if you increase the time to the first void by 2 or 3 hours, you're doubling or tripling the chances that that person is going to get over 6 hours of sleep. So above and beyond that first period, it becomes quite important to try to extend that FUSP. I think I'm out of time. Is that correct? Thank you for your question.
Well, actually, we are not running out of time. You're running out of time because you have to go to the airport.
I'm sorry.
Otherwise, it's right. He has to leave, right? So, Donald, thank you very much. I have at least 4 or 5 more questions. I will ask you next time. Have a safe travel back to Atlanta, and we thank you very much that you participated.
Thank you.
And we enjoyed the time with you.
Thank you. I enjoyed being here. And if people have questions, please direct them to my email, and I'll be happy to engage with you over email. Thanks.